Is UConn vulnerable? You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to like this, subscribe, download the podcast, engage. Getting a ton of great engagement on YouTube. Would love to see some more folks download that audio to their phones and take the show with them. But otherwise, really want to thank everyone that listens for making the switch or adding another UConn show to your daily routine here on the Locked On Podcast Network. So I wanted to kind of get that out of the way. Really appreciate it. Is this 33-3 wagon of a team vulnerable? Are they really vulnerable to a team that finished 5th in the Mountain West Conference? A conference that, while improved this year and got 6 bids, has vastly underperformed, and San Diego State again has been carrying the flag for them. A team that averages 74 points per game while only shooting 31.3% from three. And the answer is, of course, a resounding no. And we're going to talk about why you shouldn't worry about this. Why this team truly, just based on multiple factors, the numbers, the competition, the level of competition they played this year, quality of their opponents, even in the non-conference, shouldn't and won't prepare them for what they're about to get in Boston tomorrow night. So let's look at some basic stuff. 26 games this year out of 36, Jaden Ledee has been San Diego State's leading scorer. 24 times he's been their leading rebounder, so he's their best player. Sometimes scoring doesn't tell the story, but he's averaging almost 22 points and 10 rebounds a game. And there's two schools of thought on this going into tomorrow's game. I'm in the first school or first camp. You let him go one-on-one and allow him to be the primary scorer. But you don't allow Trammell, Saunders, Parrish, and Waters to also be the complementary scorers or having all of them get involved. That's why UConn is so good. It's because you can't shut down one single aspect of their game. And since San Diego State really isn't a great three-point shooting team, they may implement school of thought too. Expend some of your energy in getting Ledee out of his game, so much so that the other players don't really know how to play without their alpha leading the way. 31.3% shooting as a team as a whole. Ledee is their best three-point shooter, but he only took 42 attempts all regular season and 3 total in 2 games against UAB and Yale. Now, I'm going to pause before I get into why that's important. Let's talk about the teams they played. Just in the NCAA tournament. UAB, who is kind of a decent team. I wouldn't consider them a classic UAB team, which was like up and down the floor. I think Mike Anderson coached there at one point, and they were a pressing team. And then Yale. Listen, we're a Connecticut show. I was rooting for Yale. Yale was a nice story. Yale should have lost to Auburn. Auburn blew that game. So San Diego State is fortunate just to be here, to be in Boston, to have the opportunity to play against the number 1 overall seed. And that may sound arrogant. That may sound pompous. Good. Because so far this year, UConn has earned that respect that hasn't always been given. So I'm not going to go crazy over the outlier game that San Diego State had against Yale of the Ivy League. Again, great brand of basketball in the Ivy League, but just not the top competition. You're not going to get pushed by a Yale team that couldn't hit an open shot, made their defense look impeccable, And to their credit, though, they did what Auburn couldn't, which was shut them down and then run their stuff in an organized fashion. And we're always going to be prisoners of the moment. So that's why predictive analysis like Ken Palm is so important. And we're going to talk about that later in the show. San Diego State had an outlier game against Yale where they made 13 threes on almost 50% shooting. It's the most unlikeliest outcome of the game going into the Aztecs' favors. I think I heard a coach say who was on their squad or just someone that was scouting them, let's just hope that they have enough bullets left in their chamber. I don't really like that analogy as much. I just think if you're a great shooting team over time, it shows. So that's why UConn has done what they've done. Hunting three-pointers, getting the action they need. This team is a grinded out team in reality. They only average 7 makes a game out from 3, and they're a 31% shooting team. If they shoot 10% better in this game, even if UConn has a subpar game, how are they going to stop UConn's sets that have been super efficient, albeit against some inferior opponents? Pardon the burp there. But then we look at Northwestern. Quality opponent of the Big Ten, a much better conference than the Mountain West. And UConn beat them by almost 20 points while shooting 13% from 3. So I'm not going to lose my mind over the Yale game. That was an outlier. Let's look at San Diego State's best wins of the year. St. Mary's, right? Who was upset by Grand Canyon, I believe, who also beat San Diego State. Fun fact. And they beat St. Mary's by 10, and they shot 42% from 3. So that's an uptick for them in that game. Then you look at a game where they beat Gonzaga, won by 10 as well on the road, and shot 32% from 3. Easily their biggest win. In losses versus top talent, in quotations. If you're listening to this, I just gave you air quotes. They lost to BYU by 9, shot 27% from 3. Nobody in college basketball is going to look at BYU as the bad boy Pistons or the Arkansas Razorbacks of old, shutting you down defensively. Losing to BYU at home and shooting only 27% from 3 tells me all you need to know about this San Diego State team. Is that earlier in the year? Sure. Is it on the road? Absolutely. Let's look at the last game of the year if you want to go more recent. Shooting 5 for 18 against New Mexico, who was shellacked by a Clemson team that had a pretty good year. It was also in the Sweet 16. They shot 20% from 3, 35.7% overall. San Diego State is who we think they are. Let's not worry about one game going into their biggest game outside of the championship game in program history, because they're going up against a juggernaut, a team that is favored by double-digit points in a Sweet 16 game. This isn't, a September, a November 18th game or a January 10th game out of conference. This is the Sweet 16 regional semifinal, and UConn is a 10 or 10.5 point favorite. I have no problem looking at this game objectively. San Diego State does not stack up. We'll talk about differences between this year's San Diego State Aztecs team of this year and the last coming up. Bracket busted already? Tired of the same old daily fantasy grind where you make a roster, cross your fingers, and hope for the best? Are losing on the last leg of your pick'em entry? Introducing Better Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs talent and you can play with your friends, not against them. Pick more, in quotations, or less on real-time player stats. Strategize with your partners to boost your odds and climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the social daily fantasy sports movement. If you've been watching the show, you know that Fire Stick was my first intro into streaming, and Fire TV is now your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing views, experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV Stick, my old favorite. Thanks. Then you can plug into any of your existing TVs that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV, whether it's opening weekend for baseball or right in the middle of college basketball like we're doing right now. You're going to want to have Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos for your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues, college conferences as well. Fire TV channel lets you dive into all of the game's analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, and NBA. All right, so we talked about some of the challenges that San Diego State has on offense. And, some differences between last year's team and this year, because I think that the toughest thing that people have a hard time with, and it's the reason why they come to listen to podcasts like these, or even breakdowns of analytics on different shows across different networks, including our own Locked On College Basketball. This year's team and last year's team are different. San Diego State's identity has always been defense and toughness. That stays the same. Going back and watching some games of them this year and looking at the metrics, there was a few noticeable differences outside the obvious changes of those who have moved on in personnel. It's pretty clear that this year's team wanted to play faster, aiming to get a more up-tempo game, at least sprinkle that into some of their plays. And at times, within reason, kind of without losing their identity of having that, tough-minded defensive team that Coach Fisher and then now Coach Dutcher has really kind of implanted his own identity on this team. And there have been spurts of faster play throughout the season. The team occasionally, I think more so, it's evident where they have occasionally done so, where last year's team, similar to UConn, would not. Let me just try to break this down a different way. So traditional fast break, you're going to the basket. You're not spreading out to shoot threes or flaring out to the corner to kind of shoot those transition 3-point shots. Last year, they would not have done that. This year, they are occasionally doing that, where they aim to search for those transition 3-point shots, but they're still trying to play through Jaden Ledee. They've had an increased emphasis on their floor spacing. So, and that has a lot to do with Jaden stepping up from last year being a role player to now being the alpha dog. And him being unselfish has really helped them to kind of spread out. And it really has unleashed a different aspect of their game. And he's been good enough to help facilitate that. So while I don't think they're a dynamic offensive team, I think with him, when he starts to level up, like take the 2 games in the NCAA tournament, albeit against lower competition, he really has shown how good of a player he can become. So there's no real inclination towards double teaming opponents this year, although, again, because of the mindset of being aggressive, I see some of that as being innate in how people play basketball. Like we've talked about how that's just innate in players. No matter how much a coach tells you to stay at home, there's always an inclination to help and come down and tap down on the opposing defense. It looks like they've implemented some new offensive sets, including some high-low plays and pin downs where Ledee triggers their offense similar to Marquette. And before we go into a Jaden Lee rabbit hole, I need to ask you guys one question. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on TV all day? Have you turned down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you a can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, to continue, sorry. If you've noticed, I've kind of been touching my face a little more. I've kind of going through it here. I think the weather or whatever, I'm congested and trying to power through, just like Dan Hurley says, my toughness meter needs to rise. But to continue, Jaden is a beast. akin to Donovan last year. I had my dad on yesterday, and last year was all like, well, why doesn't Dan Hurley play him more, all that stuff. And beginning of last year, it's because Donovan bought into his role as a role player on a championship team. And that's what Jaden did last year for San Diego State. They didn't win a championship, but they got to the Final Four and they got to the final game. But he accepted his bench role, and he played some good minutes last year. And now this year, he's the star. He's emerged as their best player. So one would argue that Donovan is, if not the best player, the most impactful player on UConn. So similarities abound. So for me, focusing on specific matchups and strategies against San Diego State, I think any team that plays UConn, whether they get past this game or going forward in this tournament, hopefully they do. You have to get Donovan Clingan in foul trouble, something that Stetson and Northwestern could not do. Given Lee's success in doing so, I think I read he draws almost 9 fouls a game, on average. So I would imagine that's because multiple people guard him. And he's massive. I don't know what he's listed at, but he looks like a tight end or a linebacker in football, 6'9", maybe 240. So even though Donovan has the weight and the size to keep up with him, I don't know if his quickness is going to be there. So targeting Donovan to potentially draw some fouls. The importance, again, we talked about this already. They have to shoot the three well. If they're going to pull off what I'm going to consider the greatest upset in UConn basketball history, considering how they played this year, they're going to have another Yale outlier game and shoot the ball well from three. And part of that is going to also allow them to space out UConn's defense so that they can't kind of pack it in and make it tougher for Jaden Lee when he's trying to go to the hole. Disrupting UConn's offensive sets. This is the key. I think the key to really beating them is kind of staying in the mindset, staying in the flow of UConn isn't a fast-paced offense. They just run a lot of sets that really kind of provide paralysis by analysis. Because if you're trying to help, if you make one wrong choice, then someone does a backdoor cut. If you make one wrong choice, there's a flare screen out. If you make one bad choice, there's a pin down, back screen, there's a lob over your head. So a lot of options give people, that anxiety that to play defense against UConn has got to be difficult. I said this a long time ago. I would love to talk to an opposing coach's scout. Like who scouts these games? Like I am going off of what I think you should do. Not what they're trying to do. What's the picking of the poison, so to speak. And then lastly, I just think they have to muck it up as much as possible. They have to try to protect against those backdoor cuts, but they also have to keep a sharp eye on, who's hot, right? So last game against Northwestern, nobody was. You had a couple Cam threes. You had one Alex Caravan three. So if for some reason they have a similar game, and hopefully knock on wood, they don't, then you can start to feel the predictability of UConn's offense, which is going to flow through Tristan Newton and Donovan, and then mixing in Steph, Cam. But there's going to be more sets to get easy twos than there would be to get easy threes. But don't make no mistake. Even if UConn doesn't shoot well, they're going to still hunt those. So they're going to have to keep San Diego State honest. And then lastly, if San Diego State is going to pull off an upset, they have to have an outlier offensive performance. Whether you want to look at the Yale game on their own or how UConn has lost, even every game that UConn has lost, there has been an outlier performance. Kansas is not a good shooting team, not a good offensive team. They shot the lights out at home. Still only lost by 3. Creighton got destroyed, but part of that is DC got in foul trouble, another key that we just mentioned, and they shot 50% from 3 at home. Seton Hall, way back when, early December, or actually I think it was right around Christmas time. Kadiri Richmond had a monster game. They had 8 steals that game, 23 points, 10 rebounds. Like the kid was everywhere. Outlier offensive performance. DC got hurt. These are all the dominoes that need to fall. So just thinking about it from that perspective is going to be really difficult for a San Diego State team to pull off this upset. And we're going to talk about some individual player analysis and get into why nobody should worry about this UConn versus San Diego State game coming up after this. This week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that pushes it further than the rest. Just like any of our all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The NC State Wolfpack are obviously this week's Nissan Rogue. The team surprised us all with powerful performance in their first two games in the tournament. Wins over Texas Tech and Oakland have them set up to play Marquette in the Sweet 16. They say win life, go Rogue, and that's exactly what the Wolfpack have done here. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. And finally, passion, drive, and patience. What brings you home the winning trophy is about what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions may apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only. Available to U.S. customers. All right. Let me settle everyone down. Let's talk about some individual matchups first and foremost. Darian Trammell is recognized as the leader of this team. 100% was first team all Mountain West Conference, was the most outstanding player of the region last year that they won getting into the Final Four, even though Creighton got robbed. We'll get into that today. Big East homer right here. Lamont Butler is a rock solid point guard, willing shooter, but at 30% from three doesn't take a ton. He takes charge on offense, but he's just, again, I would consider him more of a Talik Brown, to use UConn terms. Not a great shooter, but, on occasion could have a hot night. Micah Parrish and Elijah Saunders provide supporting roles as glue guys, defenders, the consummate role players. Darian Trammell focuses on finding ways to produce and score, is returning from last year's team. Ladie is going to have to challenge Donovan, keep him honest. He takes a lot of sets and starts from the top of the key. So I believe that, Ladie is going to have to challenge Klingon, keep him honest, including shooting from three-pointers early, and maybe more than he wants to. Only shot 2 last game, made them both, but I think that helps keep Donovan honest defensively. Jitting's three-point percentage from this year is 45.2%, as we chronicled. Well above average, but just be honest, he's only shot 42 for the year, including only 3, so 45 total threes in the 36 games they played this year. So about almost 2 a game, 1.5. He's not missed a 3 in the first 2 games. I would imagine if they're going to have success, he's going to have to make 4 or 5 threes to make this a close game. But what remains similar about this team than last year is where they're ranked Ken Pom wise. We talked about Ken Pom and why analytics matter. Ken Pom has San Diego State 17th overall in all of their metrics, 53rd ranked in offense, and 8th ranked in defense. So just like we talked about, identity is more on the defensive side. So while some things change, that identity stays the same, right? For context, UConn is number 1 overall and is 9th in defense, 2nd in offense. And for further context, top-ranked defenses like Virginia, we all saw how great they are, and Rutgers, who didn't even grace us with an NCAA tournament appearance, didn't make, and I don't think Virginia even really made the real tournament. They made the first 4. So we're left all together with understanding that sometimes numbers don't always tell the full story. They can give you clues. They can give you predictive analysis, as we talked about. But does San Diego State's body of work really prepare them for what is coming at them on Thursday? Just like before when I set up the first segment, I say a resounding no. Anything is possible, right? I mean, look, we've been here before where we've been in the Sweet 16 and we've lost to an inferior opponent or a team that's a 5 seed. But it would be a monumental upset if the Aztecs could take out the Huskies in Boston, no less. There's been even if you look at the George Mason game, they got the luckiest thing possible to be in DC, which is not far from UConn. Still about 5 hours. It was literally in their hometown. George Mason is a DC school. So it's just that is fortuitous, and it was meant to be, unfortunately, for 06 and for Husky fans. I know several people who bought tickets in anticipation for this, so I'm not trying to ruin their, preparation for this. I don't think you guys have anything to worry about. But let's pretend for a small moment this is possible. Where would it rank in upset losses in UConn history? I'm going to pause for a second. Just think about that. Where in your mind? I'm not talking about the tough losses, the Final Four loss to Michigan State or the loss to Duke when I was a kid in 1989-90, 95 UCLA game. Those were games where we played really well and probably lost to I wouldn't say the better team, but it was a well-fought game and the expectation level wasn't there. The one that comes to mind for me, that's a close one here, is the George Mason game, but it's the 94 versus Florida Sweet 16 where we had a chance to ice the game and we did not. I got some UConn fan perspective from my guy, Mike Casey. His quote was this: losing tomorrow would be similar to me than when we lost in 1996 in the Sweet 16 to Mississippi State. We were a 1 seed. They were a 5 seed. We had a good team. That was the year we beat Georgetown in the Big East Championship on Ray Allen's shot over Iverson. And I don't agree with that, but I definitely see where that fits in this equation. And I hope I don't have to parse that as we go on, because what brings me comfort is we have a team that needs to make opponents play so above their heads that even entertaining them losing doesn't bother me, and it shouldn't bother you. I want you to go, lay your head down tonight in anticipation for tomorrow's game with a thought of this. In a game against a team that has beaten Purdue and a team that has beaten Illinois, who is likely on the other side, not taking anything away from Iowa State, but I think Illinois wins that game. We shot 16% from 3, but shot a remarkable 82% or almost 82% from 2-point land. Most efficient offense I've seen in my lifetime. So with knowing that, know that there's nothing to fear about this San Diego State team. I said this in one of the very first episodes I did. What team can stand in UConn's way? And the answer is UConn. If UConn plays well, if UConn plays mediocre, if UConn plays okay, they'll advance to the Elite Eight. Well, all these games now should be tough. Best 16 teams in the country left. And the road to the Final Four continues again tomorrow. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. I know I'm a little under the weather, so I apologize. There was a few pauses, so I sneezed to blow my nose, and I'm probably a little nasally, but this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, wishing you peace, love, and as always, go Huskies.